A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, I bear witness that there is nothing worthy of worship except Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad ibn Abdullah, born over 1400 years ago, was his final messenger. Whomsoever Allah guides, none can misguide, and whoever Allah allows to be misguided, there's no one, no thing that can guide him. I made this video in response to something that I saw on YouTube. I guess a friend of mine called me and asked me had I seen former college friend of mine called me and asked me had I seen some videos by a guy named Sara Suten Seti, Sonetta, Wesley Muhammad, and all of those guys, and I hadn't. So what I did was I started to look at some of the videos, and I started to see where Sara Suten Seti started making claims and accusations about Islam, and there seemed to be no one from my ummah responding. So I know some of the scholars would not feel it's worth their time because he is not a scholar. So with me not being a scholar but understanding the impact of some of the things that he's saying, I started to do the research. I started to watch some of the videos. I started to study up a little bit on Kemet, which we call Egypt, and the Muslims we call Pharaoh. And I recently saw a video, and I saw where Sara Suten Seti spoke about Dr. ben-Jochannan being his teacher, Dr. ben-Jochannan being the leader and the one that should be given the praise for this whole Kemetic trend, or people trying to be quote-unquote spiritual is what they call it, but basically they're going back and they are worshiping Pharaoh, and they're going into people's graves and taking the stuff off the walls and calling it holy scriptures and stuff that you should live by. So, which in my book is, I've never been to a eulogy where somebody was talked about bad, or if a ruler commissioned a monument to himself being built or a library being built prior to his death. I haven't seen where anybody put anything negative in there. So I'm not convinced by that stuff. So what I started to do is look at some of their research and where they were getting some of this stuff from, and I saw Sara Suten Seti talked about Dr. ben-Jochannan. So I got a book by Dr. Ben. Some of you might have seen it. It's called African Origins of Western Religion, where Dr. Ben talks about the Yahud, the Jews, the Nasara, the Christians, and then he talks about Al-Islam. When I looked on the cover, because as I always do when I get a book, I look on the cover to see who the author is and what is his qualifications for speaking on what he's speaking on. I saw what Dr. Ben said. He was a scholar, and he had taught at several different schools, and one of the schools that it says on the back of this book, and this is a picture of Dr. Ben, it talks about how he was a senior lecturer in the Faculty of Languages at Al-Azhar University. Now those not well versed in that or in the West don't know what Al-Azhar University is, but Al-Azhar University is one of the oldest universities in Islam, if not the oldest university in Islam. So with that being said, I said, Dr. Ben definitely had access to primary sources if he taught at Al-Azhar University, as the back of the book said. Dr. Ben, Faculty of Languages, Dr. Ben probably knew Arabic too. So okay, he's high powered. Now let me give the disclaimer. I knew who Dr. Ben was before I became Muslim, and I knew what Dr. Ben taught, and taught until he couldn't teach anymore, I guess because of strokes or something of that nature. So I knew Dr. Ben prior to, from just being a African American or African in America. So these are the things that I found when I looked in his book, and knowing Islam and studying Islam as much as I have on my own and classes and things of that nature, I saw fallacies in Dr. Ben's work as soon as I opened it up. And I only went to the Islam section. I didn't get into the other stuff because it doesn't concern me. I went to the Islam section. So with that being said, Dr. Ben teaching at Al-Azhar, Dr. Ben having access to primary sources, Dr. Ben probably should have been aware of Arabic or knowing Arabic or somebody there to be able to translate it for him within his student body, the people that he had been taught teaching. I said, okay, it should be something thorough. The first thing I saw, I was surprised. The first thing I saw, because Dr. Ben started in on Bilal, and Dr. Ben started to make some claims of Bilal actually teaching the Prophet Muhammad, and because Bilal ibn Rabah, may Allah have mercy on, was from Abyssinia, which we call Ethiopia today, that he probably brought a lot of the characteristics over from the ancient African religions, and a lot of times you see Sara Seti and Dr. Ben try to point out the things that they see inside the pyramids in Luxor or some of the tombs in Luxor and say they're Islamic, and he'll show maybe someone doing the prayer or parts of the prayer or something like that. And he was pointing to Bilal probably took that across the Red Sea when he was captured or whatever, the circumstance that led to Bilal being a slave prior to Islam. And this is one of the things that Dr. Ben says on page 199 in Dr. Ben's book. This is what Dr. Ben says. Dr. Ben says about Bilal, quote, "Yet this African, who is only listed as Bilal in the Muslims' holy book, the Quran, was the first muezzin," I would call it muezzin, or he says high priest or caller of the faithful. This is a direct quote from page 199. First of all, Bilal is not mentioned in the Quran. Bilal's name and Bilal is not mentioned in the Quran. So to say that who is only listed as Bilal in the Muslims' holy book is a fallacy. Bilal is not listed in the Quran. Bilal's name does not come up in the Quran. That's a fallacy. Dr. Ben taught at Al-Azhar. Dr. Ben, PhD, Dr. Ben, who put out a book, a publication for your consumption, made that thing wrong. The second thing that I saw was, and I actually saw this before, was it said Hadzart Bilal ibn Rahab. Read my lips. Hadzart Bilal ibn Rahab. And it should have been Hadrat Bilal ibn Rabah, not Rahab, Rabah. Now I'm talking about somebody who taught at Al-Azhar University, a PhD from Al-Azhar University, who was privy to primary sources, who was privy to other professors, students who are well versed in the Arabic language. So if he wanted to do research, he was privy to it. Not like some of us stuck over here in America. He had it. And these two first things, fundamental things, he had wrong. First, he couldn't say the dude's name right. And he printed it wrong. And then he wants to tell me he's an authority on Bilal ibn Rabah. And then he said it was in the Quran and it's not in the Quran. So I said, where did Dr. Ben get that from? So you look into his footnotes to see where he got it from. And Dr. Ben got it from J.A. Rogers, the world's great men of color. Dr. Ben got it from there because he said it wrong. And he wrote his name wrong. So I know where he got it from. Not from primary sources, from J.A. Rogers. Now, as a academician, as he is, as a scholar, as you guys purport him to be, I would expect it more. So then I go a little further in the book. Actually on the same page, on page 199. And Dr. Ben says something else that's like outlandish. Dr. Ben said, it is, quote, it is to be noted that Musa alayhi wasalam, as in the Hebrew religion, is not listed as a prophet in Islam. So the Muslims probably bugging out when they heard that, right? I'll say it one more time. Dr. Ben says on page 199, quote, it is to be noted that Moses, as in the Hebrew religion, is not listed as a prophet in Islam. So maybe when I looked in the Quran and I looked at Surah 33 verse 7, maybe the Quran was wrong. When I looked in Surah Al-Baqarah on verse 87, maybe that was wrong. A'udhu billah. When I looked in Surah 7, the 104th to 105th verses, that wasn't what I was reading. I was reading it wrong because the Quran's like a real. I was reading it wrong. Or maybe Dr. Ben was wrong. A scholar, a PhD, who was a senior lecturer at Al-Azhar, who had access to primary sources. Maybe. Alright. So I go a little bit further. And Dr. Ben makes a, I guess he puts his opinion on what he thinks about Islam and Islam as far as being right for Africans or people of African descent or whatever you want to call it or however they want to term it this time. Dr. Ben says this. Dr. Ben says on page 197 and 198 when he talks of mythological revelation, he says, as far as speaking about what Africans need or indigenous religions of Africans back then, he says Islam is absent of the day-to-day practical applications necessary for African people. Islam that has you praying 5 times a day. Islam that has a tradition or a sunnah or instructions on everything that you can do in life. Everything. If it's anything, going to the bathroom, we're told the tradition and the proper way of doing that. Speaking to others, everything. Taught how to pray 5 times a day, not 1 time a week. 5 times a day as a minimum. Teaches you how to wash yourself. Everything. Islam is absent of the day-to-day practical applications necessary for African people. This is a guy that was at Al-Azhar, who had to have heard that adhan 5 times a day, who had to seen the students washing, who had to seen other scholars in the way they lived in their life, the way they handled themselves, the way they talked to students, the way they talked to peers, the way they dealt with their wives. He had to have seen all of that. He's saying Islam